I really hate to be the bearer of bad news, but if you happen to own a combination of perfectly legal firearm components, something as simple as a common muzzle brake and a pin-and-welded barrel, you might be committing a felony right now, according to the ATF. And no, this isn't an old directive from some previous administration. This is what's happening right now, today, under the current leadership. What's even more concerning is that this isn't some isolated policy shift. This is part of a pattern we've been seeing from the ATF, where gun owners are quietly being turned into criminals overnight through new interpretations and regulatory changes. These reinterpretations often come with no real warning, no public discussion, and absolutely no accountability. If you think I'm exaggerating, stick around, because what I'm about to show you is not only alarming, it's proof of just how far an unelected bureaucrat can go in redefining the law and threatening millions of Americans who legally exercise their Second Amendment rights. This is about more than a few obscure regulations. It's about the erosion of trust, the abuse of authority, and a federal agency that continues to weaponize technicalities against law-abiding citizens. To understand what's really going on here, you first need to understand how the ATF operates and the kind of unchecked authority it wields. The ATF is tasked with enforcing federal firearms laws, many of which stem from the National Firearms Act of 1934 and the Gun Control Act of 1968. These laws define what constitutes a firearm, what is considered a suppressor, and what types of modifications or attachments are allowed. But the devil is always in the details, and those details are constantly being rewritten, not by lawmakers, but by bureaucrats within the agency. One division in particular that holds enormous influence is the Firearms Technology Industry Services Branch, or FTISB. This relatively obscure branch of the ATF is responsible for examining firearms, accessories, and configurations. They determine how these items should be classified under federal law. That might sound like a purely technical role, but in reality, it means that a small group of unelected officials can redefine what is legal or illegal without Congress ever voting on it. One of the key figures inside FTISB is a woman named Eve Eisenbeiss. While not many people know her name, her decisions carry serious weight. She has been linked to several highly controversial rulings, including those involving pistol braces, suppressor definitions, and most recently, pin-and-welded barrels. Despite numerous efforts, there's surprisingly little public information about her career background. But what is clear is that she has been instrumental in pushing forward some of the most extreme interpretations of firearm regulations in recent years. Under her influence, FTISB has claimed that commonly accepted configurations, such as barrels that have been permanently extended through pinning and welding, might not be legally compliant if someone could theoretically remove the attachment using tools. Never mind that this technique has been an industry standard for years and was even explicitly accepted by the ATF in a 2006 ruling. Her team is now working to reverse that position and reclassify these firearms as short-barreled rifles, which fall under stricter NFA regulation and require registration and a tax stamp. What this means is that many gun owners could unknowingly be in violation of federal law simply for possessing firearms they purchased legally and configured in ways that were previously approved. This kind of regulatory whiplash undermines not only the rule of law, but also the basic principle of due process. When one agency gets to decide and redefine legal boundaries on a whim, everyone is at risk. To show just how serious this situation has become, I want to walk through a few real-world examples that reveal the absurdity of what's going on. These are not theoretical cases or hypothetical possibilities. These are actual incidents that reflect how ATF, through FTISB, has pushed the boundaries of what it means to be in compliance with federal firearms laws. One of the most telling examples involves a man named Charles Wright. He was taken to court because the ATF claimed that his firearm setup, which included a pistol brace with a cheek rest, effectively transformed his weapon into a short-barreled rifle. The only reason he didn't end up with a criminal conviction was because a jury had enough common sense to throw the case out. That case should never have reached a courtroom in the first place, but it shows how far the agency is willing to go. The fact that a brace, designed to help people shoot more safely and effectively, could be reinterpreted as a defining feature of an NFA firearm is something most gun owners never saw coming. But the madness doesn't stop there. The ATF has, in recent years, started targeting items that most of us would never associate with firearms. This is where things cross over from restrictive policy to outright parody. At one point, officials began suggesting that common household objects like pillows, cups, and even potatoes could be viewed as suppressors if there was any theoretical way to attach them to the end of a barrel. Yes, you heard that right. According to the logic being applied by FTISB, the mere potential to modify or misuse a household item is enough to draw legal scrutiny. This kind of rationale turns basic intent into potential criminal behavior and turns your average homeowner into a suspect simply because they own things that exist in every kitchen or bedroom in the country. The most recent and perhaps most outrageous shift has to do with pin-and-welded barrels. For decades, manufacturers and individual builders have used this technique to bring barrels up to the legal minimum length without needing to register their rifles as NFA items. The ATF even confirmed in 2006 that this method was compliant with the law. By permanently affixing a muzzle device, builders could make a 14. 5-inch barrel meet the 16-inch requirement. That was standard practice. That was understood and respected. But suddenly, the ATF under its current leadership has decided to reverse course. The new interpretation being floated suggests that if a device can be forcibly removed, even with specialized tools, then it no longer qualifies as a permanent attachment. In other words, just because something could theoretically be removed with enough time, force, and equipment, it might not be compliant anymore. That puts an enormous number of otherwise legal firearms in a gray area. These aren't rare modifications. These are common configurations used by manufacturers for years, trusted by law-abiding gun owners across the country. And none of this has come through congressional action or public debate. It has all been done through quiet memos, policy reinterpretations, and unchecked authority. The implications are massive. If you're a gun owner, a hobbyist, a competitive shooter, or even someone who just wants to build within the law, you are now left wondering whether the same setup you used last year might make you a felon tomorrow. That is not how responsible governance should work. Now that we've looked at some of the examples, I want to go a bit deeper into the technical and legal implications of these reclassifications, because they matter far more than most people realize. What we are dealing with is not simply a change in enforcement. We are dealing with a radical reinterpretation of long-standing technical standards that the firearms industry and gun owners have relied on for decades. Take the issue of pin-and-welded muzzle devices. When someone welds a flash hider or brake onto a shorter barrel, they are doing so specifically to comply with the legal minimum length requirements. The ATF's own handbook and prior correspondence stated that as long as the attachment was affixed in a way that could not be removed without destroying the barrel, it was considered permanent. This standard has been followed across the board. Gunsmiths know it, manufacturers build around it, and gun owners trust it. What the ATF is doing now is playing with the definition of permanence by introducing the idea that something is not permanent if it can be reversed with extreme effort. They are moving the goalposts. They are no longer asking what is likely to happen under normal conditions. They are asking what is theoretically possible. That is not how engineering works, and it certainly is not how law should be enforced. The real danger in this approach is that it turns compliance into a moving target. If a rule can change depending on how someone interprets the physical limits of a device, then nobody is truly safe from prosecution. It also places enormous pressure on gun owners to over-comply, to avoid any setup that could be misinterpreted down the road, and to essentially live in a state of legal uncertainty. That's not just bad policy, that's an abuse of power. The legal system is supposed to provide clarity, not confusion. When citizens follow clear rules and standards, they should not have to worry that those rules will be reinterpreted in a way that criminalizes their behavior retroactively. Yet that's exactly what's happening here. Law-abiding gun owners are being put in legal jeopardy by decisions made behind closed doors, by individuals with no electoral accountability. And, let's not forget, these decisions are not being made in a vacuum. They're coming from a part of the ATF that operates with very little oversight, and from individuals like Eve Eisenbeiss, whose names most Americans have never even heard. These people are not elected. They are not appointed by the president. They are not confirmed by the Senate, yet they are writing rules with the power to destroy lives, businesses, and communities. The bottom line is this: the ATF is not just enforcing the law, it is actively shaping the law through obscure and constantly shifting interpretations. That is not its role. That is the role of Congress. And when one agency claims the power to redefine legality on a whim, our entire system of government starts to break down. What concerns me the most is not just the specific reclassifications or the examples of overreach. It is the larger message these actions send to law-abiding citizens. When a federal agency starts moving the legal goalposts without due process, the result is that millions of responsible Americans find themselves unsure about whether they are complying with the law. That sense of legal instability is not a small issue. It has a chilling effect on freedom. We are seeing the line between criminal intent and technical noncompliance being blurred in ways that should make every American uncomfortable. For decades, firearms owners operated under the assumption that if they followed the rules, purchased legal components, and configured their firearms in accordance with published ATF guidelines, they would be in the clear. That has changed. Now, even actions that were once encouraged, like using a pin-and-weld technique to build a compliant rifle, are being thrown into doubt. This shift is not just theoretical. There are people who now face uncertainty about whether their legally purchased, legally configured firearms could suddenly be considered illegal. And let's be honest, not everyone has access to a lawyer or the resources to fight a federal agency. The result is fear. The result is silence. People will stop customizing their firearms. Some may even stop using them altogether, not because they have done anything wrong, but because they are afraid they might be targeted. I also worry about how this affects trust in government. Agencies like the ATF are supposed to enforce the law, not rewrite it. When unelected officials issue policy shifts that carry the weight of criminal enforcement, we no longer have a government of the people. We have a regulatory class that is untouchable, unchecked, and willing to bypass public input in favor of quiet decisions that impact millions. That is not how a constitutional republic is supposed to work. This is why so many people are calling not just for reform, but for accountability. If the federal government can turn ordinary citizens into felons with the stroke of a pen, then there is something deeply broken in the way authority is being used. This is about more than firearms. It is about preserving the principles of due process, equal protection, and the rule of law. There are things we can do, and I want to end on a note of action, not just frustration. First, it is important to support organizations that are actually fighting for transparency and accountability. Groups like Gun Owners of America have already used the Freedom of Information Act to expose internal ATF decisions and to alert the public to how these reclassifications are happening. Without their efforts, many of us would have no idea what was going on behind the scenes. They are not perfect, but they are doing the hard work of shining a light on a process that thrives in the dark. Second, we need to demand more from our elected officials. It is not enough to simply vote for candidates who claim to support the Second Amendment. We need representatives who are willing to step up and rein in agencies that are operating beyond their intended scope. Congressional oversight needs to be more than just a formality. It should be an active check on regulatory abuse. Third, I believe it is critical to stay informed and to share what we learn with others. The more people understand what is happening, the harder it becomes for these policies to remain hidden. Gun owners need to talk to one another, to local media, and to their community leaders. This is not just about defending gun rights. It is about defending the idea that the government must be accountable to the people. And finally, I would encourage everyone watching this to take these issues seriously. The erosion of civil liberties often begins with small, technical changes that most people overlook. But over time, those changes add up. If we care about freedom, if we care about the Constitution, then we have to be willing to speak up and stand firm when that freedom is threatened. At the end of the day, this issue is not going away quietly. The ATF has already shown that it is willing to reinterpret long-standing practices and policies without oversight or accountability. That reality should concern anyone who values constitutional rights and fair government. I have said what I needed to say, and I hope it made you think more critically about where this is headed. If this video helped clarify what is really happening, I encourage you to stay informed, speak out, and support efforts that push back against regulatory overreach. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.